Hey folks, here's a video from Michael where he's confronted with this particular individual, and trust me, the way it plays out and ends is jaw-dropping. I'll be giving my insights as we go along. So let's jump in and watch.
Do you believe that organ donation should be mandatory?
I do not.
You do not. Okay, so if you believe that even a dead person has the right to bodily autonomy, even if that dead person's organs could save up to 8 lives, and yet you also believe that women should be legally mandated to sacrifice their bodily autonomy in order to save the life of a fetus, by your own logic, a corpse has more right to bodily autonomy than a living, breathing woman.
Well, you imposed upon me a liberal view that I do not hold, which is that my views of abortion come from some sense of bodily autonomy. I'm not a huge autonomy guy to begin with. I don't think that I own my body. I think my body is sort of a gift, and I have obligations to my creator. The reason that I don't support mandatory organ donation is not because of some liberal conception of autonomy or something. It's because that's not what your organs are for. Your organs are for you. Your lungs are to bring oxygen to your blood. Your heart is to pump blood around your body. Your liver is to take care of what I will probably do later on at the bar after this speech, and so on and so forth. My organs are not for you. Your organs are not for me. So you can give an organ donation, and that can be a lovely thing to do, but you aren't obligated for it because things are known largely by what they are for.
Okay. It sounded like you were just going to be anti-organ donation for a second. I was like, that's weird.
No. But I am against, going in and stealing people's organs. I think that would be quite wrong.
Stealing from a person who isn't alive, which gives them
I think
right,
desecrating bodies is pretty bad,
right
or like digging up graves is bad too, yeah.
Mm-hmm. If you don't believe that withholding resources like life-saving organs, which you would die without if you have organ failure, if you don't believe that withholding resources like that means that you're killing a person, would you be pro cutting the umbilical cord rather than removing a fetus so that the fetus would no longer be able to grow without the nutrients it needs?
I think it would be wrong for a mother to kill her child. So I don't view my organs, say, as resources, as you've put it in a kind of like materialist liberal way. I kind of think of them as my organs, and I think of my body as like my body, and I think of me as a person, not just a big sack of flesh that can be chopped up for the pleasure of some liberal technocrat. Call me old-fashioned, I guess. But then you turn to this example and you say, well, okay, what about cutting the umbilical cord eventually you do cut the umbilical cord when the baby comes out, but what about cutting the umbilical cord or otherwise killing the baby? I think that would be quite wrong to do because your baby is not for your killing. Your baby is not justifying some kind of murder. That was the topic of our discussion tonight. And furthermore, a woman's womb, which is another organ that you haven't brought up, has a purpose too. And the purpose of the woman's womb is to grow a baby. And the baby is not just a clump of cells or a parasite or any other dehumanizing way that the liberals talk about it. The baby is your baby. And when mothers kill their babies, that's contrary to reason and contrary to nature.
In John 15 verse 18, Jesus reminded us, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. This is a powerful reminder that we are never alone in facing rejection or persecution for standing up for what is right. Yeah, Jesus experienced hatred, opposition because of the truth that he shared. Yes, he did. And as his followers, we too may face similar challenges. But however, we should not be discouraged. No, instead, we need to find comfort in knowing that we are walking in his footsteps. Literally.
So back to what I was saying, you love doing this thing where you go off about some nonsense that isn't what the original question was about.
Logic, yes, yeah, I know. I do occasionally,
logic
apply that.
Entirely unrelated to what I was saying in the first place. But
what were you saying? Perhaps I misunderstood. I thought I understood.
You misunderstood. So withholding resources.
Right. Yeah, I suppose I just don't.
Someone will die.
Yeah,
when you have organ failure, not having an organ donor kills you. Surprise. So withholding resources from them, that isn't killing, that isn't wrong. But withholding resources from a growing fetus, somehow that's different. And the way as you make that leap, so I'm getting confused there.
You are getting confused. As I tried to explain, you are beginning with a premise that all of our organs are just undifferentiated resources to which any of us might be entitled. And that's a novel view. It's a view held by, I guess, some rather extreme liberals or materialists, but it's not a view held by me. I don't think that it's all just undifferentiated flesh. I think that things like organs have both form and matter. So there's the matter, there's the flesh, there's the stuff, but then there's the form, which tells you about what that thing is. And so my liver might look a lot like your liver, but they're different livers. One's mine, for instance, and one is yours. So you don't have a right to mine, and I don't have a right to yours, because your liver is for you, and my liver is for me. And we all know this, and we all act that way. That's why you're not coming up here and attacking me and ripping my kidneys out and selling it on a market in Wuhan or something like that. But we pretend that we don't believe these things because it helps to advance an argument which is totally indefensible and unnatural, namely that we ought to kill a baby or something like that.
So your organs are for you and you alone. You get to decide what to do with them. But a woman doesn't get that choice about her womb, about her ovaries.
Well, the baby is not an organ of hers. A baby is an individual human being.
You get to make choices about your internal organs, but a living, breathing woman does not.
Well,
okay, I understand.
No, I don't think you do understand, because I don't think you understand very well at all, unfortunately.
Why is these people just want to be listened to, but are not willing to listen? In reality, they are not asking for acceptance. They are demanding or forcing their sexuality on others as the primary focus, but under the guise of having superior, higher moral standards, then expecting the government to impose laws to enforce their views. Can you imagine? Usually, acceptance by society requires a certain level of assimilation to the accepted norms, not pointing out to differences, or criticizing others who disagree, and then expecting to be embraced by them. No, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't. This is the inevitable result when emotion clash with logic. Logic will always prevail in the end. However, emotions, being driven by deep feelings and personal attachments, often resist the rational truth. Sanity. Emotions, by their very nature, can cloud judgment and lead us to act impulsively or even sometimes irrationally. Literally. Ladies and gentlemen, when we allow emotions to guide our decision making, they can override our ability to think clearly and assess situations logically. Literally.
But so then, Mr. Knowles, due to your call for the good of society, transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely. What do you propose we do? We cannot violate the U.S. Constitution, and seeing as these laws and bills are targeting and are only applicable to approximately 1.2 to 1.8% of people aged 13 to 17 and approximately 0.4 to 0.6% of the ages 18 and above, it is obviously and very clearly not neutral nor generally applicable. So I ask you again, what do you propose we do to address this issue that is not in violation of the Constitution and is humane?
There was a lot there, so let's take it from the top. You premised your question on the suggestion that men who identify as women, they actually have the brains of women, right? And women who identify as men, they actually have the brains of men. So I would ask you, Could you tell me a little bit more about the differences in the brains of men and women? How do men and women differ by their brains? Would you say one is a little smarter than the other, one's a little sharper, or those women, maybe they're a little more emotional, men, they're a little better at, keeping a level head. What would you say is the difference between the male and the female brain?
So some of the research that they've shown is different sizes of different portions of the brain. I don't have the actual facts in front of my face. I simply only have the actual findings of the research.
I raise the question because I think you've unwittingly accepted a premise that is contrary to the liberal point of view and probably to a polite conversation, which is that men and women have these fundamentally different brains. And so if you're saying that men and women are distinct categories, and for that reason perhaps we ought to do away with some of the lies of the feminist movement and some of the lies of the homosexual rights movement, that's fine by me. But I think that these claims are a little bit dubious. And it also undermines the premise of transgenderism. The premise of transgenderism is that one's true self is not necessarily dependent upon one's body, so that one's sex is biologically determined, but one's gender expression is not biologically determined. It's socially constructed and can be whatever one wants it to be. But the case that you've just presented for transgenderism is different than that. What you're saying is that actually transgenderism is biologically determined because the brain is an organ of the body. So what you're really claiming is that these men who claim to be women, they just are biologically women. So you're free to pursue more studies on this. The studies that I've seen are pretty scant, pretty weak, and are not particularly persuasive. But sure, you can have all of those studies. It still doesn't address the question of transgenderism, which is what happens when someone wants to identify as a sex that is different from their physical form. And in that issue, then we have to ask the question, can one really do that? And I see no evidence, including even if I believed all of those studies, which I don't, but even if I did, that still wouldn't make an argument for that point. So I think if you're going to argue for the transgender ideology, you have to make the point that identity has nothing to do with the physical body. And that's absurd. And there are plenty of ways to understand the relationship between our metaphysical selves and our physical selves. Hylomorphism is the technical term that describes it. For at least 2,300 years, it's good enough for me, the idea that we're a union of body and soul, that sexual difference derives from the body and is an inseparable accident of the individual that persists as long as the individual exists, but it applies to the whole person because we're a composite of body and soul. That's a reasonable explanation to me, and it's served us very well for the entirety of our civilization. If the transgender movement has a different conception of what the person is, they're free to make the argument, but they haven't. What they do is they vacillate between mutually contradictory arguments. On the one hand, they'll say that my true self has nothing to do with my body. Then on the other hand, they'll make the argument you just made, which is that my true self is entirely dependent upon my body. And so I think they've got to get their story straight, but I don't think that they can.
In a godly society, this dynamic is even more evident. People spiritually disconnected from the truth of God can become blinded by their own emotions and worldly perspectives. Ladies and gentlemen, the absence of a strong moral foundation rooted in faith leads to a hardening of the heart. Without the guidance of God's wisdom and understanding, individuals become increasingly resistant to the truth, unable to see beyond their own emotions and biases. The heart grows hardened when it is not softened by the transformative power of God's word and God's love. You see? And this leads to spiritual blindness. It leads to spiritual blindness. In a society, individuals may become more consumed by their feelings, whether anger, fear, desires, rather than seeking clarity and wisdom that only logic and truth can provide. To sum up, the preaching of the gospel of Jesus Christ is immensely positive and an impactful act. It brings about personal transformation, spreads love, justice, hope, and truth, ladies and gentlemen, and also aligns with God's command. It offers eternal meaning and fills those who hear it with deep joy. Ultimately, it's the most precious gift humanity can receive. You see, creating lasting change in both individuals and communities. Also, at the same time, reflecting God's heart and His purpose to the world and for the world. So, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to click on the next one, and don't forget to like, to comment, and also to subscribe. I will see you next time. Bye bye for now.